Hello, lovely you. I felt called to come and record a very informal podcast, which is how it is on the Marion Rose Podcast. So, really to emphasize that this is the Marion Method and my own interests as me, Marion Rose. This is nothing to do with aware parenting, although I do have my latest aware parenting children's book there in the corner. Tantrums are not terrible, but that's aware parenting. I do have a new aware parenting podcast, the Living Aware Parenting podcast. This what I'm sharing here is nothing to do with aware parenting or in any way represents aware parenting. So this topic came up for me the other day. I'm recording this on the 6th of April. So on the 1st of April, here in Australia, and I know many countries, but not everywhere, which I only just learned on the Facebooks, is April Fool's Day. And I've never noticed it before, and I think there's a reason for this, which I'm going to share about, which is there were a couple of April Fool's jokes on Instagram that I found quite hang on a minute. That's my doggy dog. I felt quite shocked. I felt quite upset. I felt shocked and upset would be the main feelings. And they were both, I'm reflecting back now. They were both very realistic, and I actually thought they were real. And they were both about topics that for me are, I'm going to say, quite serious. And I believed them. And when I realised later down, reading the comments, that they were actually April Fool's jokes, I actually felt quite, how did I feel then? I don't exactly remember the feeling. I had the sense of I really don't enjoy this. And actually in an MM language, I really have a no for this. And I was contemplating, I wrote a post about it, people responded. When I was contemplating, I realised that nowadays more than ever, every post I read on social media and every bit of information actually I'm getting from anywhere, online in particular, I have much more discernment happening about, in particular, whether it's AI. And I've experienced in the past 6 months, so I wonder if you have, particularly on Instagram, that such a large proportion of the posts that I see are written by AI. I know I'm tracking, parsing out, discerning whether this is something that's completely written by AI or whether someone has worked with AI and seeing the similar types of words. I mean, we all saw the M dashes. Well, I imagine you've seen the M dashes. That was the early ways of discerning. And still there are things that are very clear, the types of languaging. So what I realised that is so much has changed for me in the past year. I mean, so much has changed for me in the past 6 to 10 years about all of this kind of stuff, as it's, lots of things have become clear in terms of what's presented online. And I think as these platforms have changed, and I realise now it's making a joke where something actually really could be true is no longer funny for me. Because all the time I'm reading through even things that I enjoy, and they're things that are for entertainment, there's still a part that's reading, is this true? Is this real? Is this AI? And so what I realized was there were a few things that I did find funny, and I laughed, and I even shared one, and that was where it was very, very clear to me that that it was a joke. It was just obviously a joke. And one of the ones was, I love ice skating. One of the ones was the blade manufacturers had a pretend blade ice skate with a little Zamboni machine on the back. So the Zamboni machine is a machine that cleans the ice, remounts melts and refreezes the ice to make a lovely smooth surface. I found that funny because it was obviously not true. It's obviously not true. And actually, oh my gosh, I think I am going to bring a tiny bit of aware parenting in here, actually, which is, well, I was thinking about aware parenting. So I'm going to just say this bit is aware parenting. Whoops. About the balance of attention. So in aware parenting by Aletha Salter, PhD, the balance of attention is where there's the balance of attention between something that is painful in the past that we are reconnecting with, or a child is reconnecting with, whilst they are knowing that they are safe in the present. And this is the case whether it's crying and raging or laughter and healing through play. It's through play, again, the child needs to know, for example, if they've been through a big rain, big floods or something, and then we're playing a game with water, that they really need to know that they're not in those floods in order to know they're safe, in order for healing to happen. So I was contemplating this, so I'm going to put aware parenting back to the side. Thank you, Aletha. I was contemplating this in terms of April Fool's jokes, and how when it was very clear to me that it was a joke, that is funny for me. I found that funny. I was entertained. I felt amused. But this time now, where it was things which actually could have been true, or that person could have thought they were true, even though I don't think that's true, I didn't find that funny, because I'm seeing things that happen all the time. The what's true, what's real, what's not real, the lines being blurred. We have people using AI, what is it called? AI twins. To me, one of the most important things right now is discerning. I think it's become one of the most important things. So for me, that's, in terms of finding something funny, at the moment it's only funny to me when it's clearly a joke. It's clearly not, they're not trying to be real, it's a funny joke. So it was another one that I found funny. It was clearly a joke. It was by a barefoot shoe company. If you know me, I love barefoot shoes. The second episode in this podcast was all about barefoot shoes and the bigger cultural picture, the disconnected domination culture. And in one of the companies, they had barefoot shoes, and they said we're now selling them in high-heeled versions. Clearly a funny joke. I found that funny. Ding! Because it was clearly not true. It's funny. And so that's what I really wanted to share here. I wonder if you resonate at all. I'm remembering a few different things here. I remember learning about Montessori when I was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 24. With her dad trained as a Montessori teacher. So I got out all his books and all his notes and all his folders, and I wish these messages weren't coming through and making ding noises. And what I remember, if I'm remembering this accurately, this may not be accurate because it is a long time ago I was doing that. I was passionate about Montessori, and I remember doing things like going into the paint shops and just I asked the people in the paint shop, it was the hardware shop, many times when my daughter and I would go into town, we would get, oh dearie me, thank you for the lovely messages, and not right now, thank you very much. So we were going to the hardware shop, and we would ask for 2 of the paint swatches, and what I did over time is collected them, because one of the things in Montessori was lots of things in relation to matching, being able to tell the difference between colours. So I had all these little colour swatches that then we would play with and discern and work out the difference between. And my understanding was Montessori had said something like being able to discern and really clearly see things is a protection for children against, I think, maybe even advertising, even though she said this was such a long time ago. Maybe there was kind of nascent early advertising And I think it's even more important now, being able to discern, being able to think for ourselves. I'm interested too because when I was planning the podcast episodes, when I first set this up, I haven't actually felt called to record many episodes, which is why I haven't. I did have a calling to talk about being what's often called open-minded. I kind of quite like that phrase in terms of open-minded. And what I often think about with consciousness and reality and paradigms and paradigm shifts, so many of the things that I'm into are really paradigm shifts away from the disconnected domination culture. Whether that's perspectives on feelings, for example, aware parenting and feelings, seeing crying and raging and laughing and play as healing, as long as there is that balance for attention, the safety. I'm really into Buteyko Breathing. I have been for 20 years. In fact, I just shared a post. In fact, I've just been on Facebook and seen things about all of these things. Someone was wearing a nasal strip and I was saying I've been wearing mouth tape for 20 years when I sleep. And up until recently, it was not even, I could not even find mouth tape. Nowadays, there's so many different companies who sell it, and it's kind of not so fringe. And again, Buteyko Breathing is very different, so it has a very different way of understanding breathing and most physical symptoms. I'm into another whole different paradigm in relation to symptoms in the body, which again is very, very different. I really like I love barefoot shoes, as you know. I love the Marion Method. I love Nonviolent Communication. I love all these ways of really what I call freeing ourselves from disconnected domination culture conditioning. And every time I've learned about each of those things, that has invited me to expand my consciousness out of the conditioning that I had to see things in a bigger way. And if you're listening to this rather than watching me, I'm making my hands kind of go bigger and bigger. It's almost like a circle. You can see it like it's not a circle, a sphere. And my experience in life is we're invited to see if we want to expand our consciousness, if we want to be open-minded, to open to different ways of looking at the world, at consciousness, at reality, at life, at feet, at symptoms, at feelings, at everything. And in my experience, that process has been generally quite gradual. And there have been a few points in my life where I've really noticed that that's been bigger. So I think about learning about aware parenting for me wasn't such a big step because I already had, for the 14 years before, I was immersed in developmental psychology, psychotherapy, pre and perinatal psychology, hypnotherapy, all of these kinds of things. I had all of this background. So aware parent, I was looking for a parenting paradigm that would resonate with all of those. Attachment theory. I'd read the continuum concept in 1992. So all of the things that are all part, anthropology, all part of aware parenting, pretty in general, the main ideas of them all. I was looking for a form of parenting that would fit with that. So when I discovered Aletha Salter's work, funny I said this wasn't going to be aware parenting. It isn't about aware parenting, I'm just including it in here. There was just one extra piece that was different for me, and that was the understanding of crying and raging and laughter and play, or you could say two aspects. So even that was a big step. But so I'm always in awe of people who don't have all that other background, for whom it's a much bigger step. So I'm thinking about this, if we have this sphere, how much we need to expand our consciousness in order to be open to a different paradigm. So for me, it wasn't so huge, and yet in some ways it was huge. Then when our daughter was 9 months old, I was like, I love this. I love aware parenting. There's something else. I'm looking for something else. And I discovered Nonviolent Communication by Marion Rose. And I remember when I read his main core text, Nonviolent Communication and Language of Life. And I remember feeling, and I had a feeling word for it because I was reading that feeling word in the lists of feelings and needs, feeling completely discombobulated, because so many of the concepts, ideas, beliefs that I had internalized growing up in what I call the disconnected domination culture were, this was different. This was different. I remember having a sense of really almost like my mind stretching. Do you ever had that? It's really like, oh, and I felt quite uncomfortable and actually quite overwhelmed at times, because like, wow, this is such a big shift. That was a really mammoth shift for me. So I had other shifts as well, like the shift to free birthing. That was also, but again, it wasn't such a huge shift because I had, again, probably how long would that have been? Like more of a decade of being really immersed in understanding about birth and exploring it and da 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 da. So, you know, the longer time that we're immersed in something, it's like there's time and space to expand quite slowly. And I think sometimes when we come across things, there's going to be a bigger expansion, and often that can be quite, yeah, I felt discombobulated. That was just the word for it. Discombobulated. And I remember reading it over and over again until these things, then I decided I wanted to speak classical NVC, classical NVC, and for my children to learn to grow up speaking classical NVC, which they did for several years, which I loved. That didn't continue, and so I stopped as well. But I internalized all the core concepts of it from having spoken classical NVC for quite some years. I would say how many years? Maybe 7 years. I'd say. Let's see. Oh, interesting. This whole 7-year cycle. Then I often also think about what happens if we're shown information that's really way outside our frame of reference. So I have one example of this. So that's why I really want to say this is me. This is the bits that where I talk about aware parenting. That's aware parenting. Everything else is all me, because, as you know, aware parenting is not. It has no spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs, any of those kinds of things. So I remember in 2012 I went to something called Uplift Festival, and I sat right at the front for almost everything. I loved it. I watched Anita Morjani. I'd already read her book, so where she talked about her near-death experience. And there was another guy there called, and I remembered his name the other day, Alexander, wasn't it? Eben Alexander. Oh, thank you, life. Eben Alexander. Had I read his book too? I don't remember whether I'd read it before or read it after. And he had also had a near-death experience, and he'd been very much he was a neuroscientist, but actual neurosurgeon, I don't know the apt term, and he'd been very, his belief system before this experience had been very much, there is nothing else. People he'd worked with as patients, in inverted commas, who had these experiences, he just thought it was, artifacts of the brain. But he went through this whole experience and his whole perspective of reality changed. So I also watched him. I really wanted to have that experience from both of them and from the others there of this kind of transmission. And I remember going up and talking to him in one of the breaks. So yummy to have this opportunity to speak to various people that had been speaking. So this was back in 2012. They had one. Unless it was 2013. I know I went 2012. In 2012, I went in 2013, and I went in 2014. I think maybe 3 or 4 years. I don't know. And every year this festival was on, and I started asking him questions, and he started telling me things about like the Earth, about the Earth and about different planets and the kind of. Seem to remember something about the bigger picture of reality, and I am fascinated in the bigger picture of reality. I'm here to understand life more, in ways that expand gradually. And I remember for a moment kind of almost understanding it as almost like a microsecond of kind of getting it, and then having the sense that it was so far out of my frame of reference, out of my understanding of reality, that I couldn't really even understand it. And when I speak like that, I also think about there's some people that speak, don't they? I'm not sure if this is really true, but when the colonizers came to what they called the New World, there's some talk of some of the indigenous peoples not being able to see the ships because they didn't, that was so outside their frame of reference. I don't know whether it's true or not, but I'm sharing it here as a part of that sense of sometimes something is so completely unknown to us, it's so completely beyond what we can understand, that we're not able to really take it in, understand it, see it. I think this is something different to what the DDC does, which is the disconnected domination culture wants us to be immersed in DDC consciousness. Oh, I've got big snoring here. Big snoring from Koyo. The DDC doesn't want us to change the conditioning. Conditioning is meant to be, you probably know I'm passionate about this. We're meant to internalize conditioning growing up from a very young age, internalize it fully, and then pass it down. That's how it survives. I see it as kind of almost like I think more like the original meaning of the word meme. That's my understanding of it. It's more of like, almost call it like thought forms, or it wants to continue. And one of the ways it continues is by teaching people to shame and judge those who are talking about something that's outside that paradigm. So if you've ever looked at anything that's outside the mainstream paradigm of the DDC, particularly online, particularly in kind of not spaces that are really supported, just like the general online space, it's very common to see responses that are shaming, that include harsh words about each other, that are really just harsh. And really that's what we're taught in the DDC. We're taught that if someone is believing something different, to judge, to shame, all of this unenjoyable stuff. I'm not even going to include the words here because I don't enjoy any of those words and I choose not to speak them or write them. That's because when someone's getting free from a paradigm, from a cultural conditioning, in this case DDC conditioning, DDC I see it as a bit like an cellular form of wanting to get people to come back in again and believe the same thing again. And of course, one of the things that is so painful is to be the recipient of shame or judgment or coercion, of course. And so I see those forms of consciousness as being trying to get people to come back in again, come back and just believe what the DDC wants us to believe. So it's a big process, isn't it? It's a big process I find for myself, and I like to go really outside of my frame of reference and my understanding and explore things. So I love exploring all different ideas, and I'll often explore things. They often call it going down rabbit holes, don't they? And I'll explore them and I'll explore them. I like exploring something. I might get to the end point of a rabbit hole, or to the point where I have a no to explore more and go. And I might have a sense of very clear either, yes, this deeply resonates with me, this knowing, even though it's completely different from my cultural conditioning. Or I might have a very clear, actually, this really doesn't resonate with me, or I might get information elsewhere. Or I might have I don't know, this could be reality, or what I've been taught in the DDC could be reality. I don't really know. I'm open to both or something else. At the moment, I don't know. And I'm actually now comfortable to be in that not knowing, which I didn't really used to be. It's taken a while as well to be at that point. I do want to say, though, one other thing. Oh, interesting. I do want to say, though, I remember a few years ago, I can remember the major points of learning information and that were really outside, let's say, my frame of reference. Interesting, isn't it? What I'd been taught growing up in this culture. And I remember one time that people talk about cognitive dissonance, don't they? I don't know if this is actually the accurate definition, but I remember one time, I was watching something and it was something so outside my reality. It was like, when I'm talking about little jumps, it was so big. The jump was so big that I actually felt quite scared. Because so much of what we believe to be true is also part of our identity. We've grown up with these certain ways of thinking, questioning them, the possibility that they're actually not true, and the possibility that people have been telling us stuff also maybe thinking they're not true, or maybe knowing they're not. There's so much involved in being open to this. This can be a really big thing, and I think this is why often people are not willing to look into different ways of doing things, whether it's barefoot shoes or NVC or Buteyko or any of those things, because they do invite us and require us to do things differently, and often differently from people around us, and we may experience being judged or shamed by others. And this is something I love about what I've developed in the Marion Method, is nowadays what I say is basically, and what I have for myself is, I know people will be judging me and shaming me, but I'm not willing to be hurt by that. I'm not willing to be affected by that, because I know it's their cultural conditioning. The DDC teaches us to judge and shame others on a deep soul level. In a Marion Method perspective, they might be longing to explore what I'm exploring, or living the life I'm living, or being free in the ways that I am, or whatever it may be. So that's really transformed things for me. That's why the Marion Method, so much of it is this cultural piece, which is why I'm really showing a lot about this today. But we could see this also on all levels. So some of the things I've mentioned today would fit on all the different levels of the MM work. So spiritual, psycho-spiritual, cultural, consciousness, thoughts, feelings, the body. They're all different. They involve different elements of those where we can question. I've been told all along X, Y, and Z. I mean, thinking about back to parenting again, the cultural norms in many, say, Western countries for prams, strollers, cots, all of these things. And I imagine if you're watching this, and you're still watching this, you've probably inquired into all these kinds of things and explored. And so that's what I love doing. For me, I just find it, I feel exhilarated exploring new ideas, and I love opening my mind more. I love opening my consciousness more. I love the sense that as I get older and older, my consciousness is expanding more and more. I have more space for more information on all layers and levels. And here's an example. Yesterday I was looking at something and I was like, oh, really want to know if this is true or not true. So it's kind of coming back to how I started with the April Fool's thing, and true, not true, real, not real. And so I did some research and I wasn't coming up with anything. And I said, so this is a Marion Method practice. I said, life, I'd really love to know more about the truth of this. And I thought, probably if I knew the truth of this, it would be too big. And actually, I think that's what... Actually, I'm going to share the end of this and then I'm going to come back to that part. So I said, life, would you be willing to show me, just in a slightly expanded way, so something that I can make sense of? It's not going to be too big, that's going to be not only discombobulating but actually very shocking, or just too much for my consciousness. Are you willing just to show me the next thing? And so I didn't find out information about that, but as I was looking on YouTube, and I happened to see a video about the book The Salt Path, and I had vaguely heard about what happened, about all of that. I don't know if you read it. It was a book that I read some years ago, and it had quite an effect on me. I think mainly because it was walking the coastal paths of England, and I used to do that with my dad. And anyway, it's turned out that so much of what was written in that book was not actually true, even though it was posited as true. And I thought, I think life is communicating to me that this thing that I think isn't really actually true is not true. And it communicated me as I'd asked for, in a way that wasn't going to be too overwhelming for me. And so the other thing I wanted to say, isn't it funny? I've said that a few times. And the other thing I wanted to say, I'll just go ahead and say it. I want to say one more thing. I'm going to say one more thing, which is in psychosynthesis that I trained in, psychosynthesis psychotherapy, we learned all about altered states, what have been called at various times peak experiences, opening experiences, enlightenment type experiences, spiritual experiences, and what is actually happening then. And part of the training was how to support people to integrate those experiences into their personality, basically. And how some of the maps and models can be seen as that if someone has an altered state experience which is so outside their frame of reference, sometimes that makes it very, very hard for them to either come back and be here, or integrate that in a way that they can really keep on to really have the information accessible to them. You can think about things like psychotic breaks. I mean, some of these things, they can be very powerful. So I think this is, for me, why I've got really clear on myself. Yes, I really love expanding my consciousness, and I'm so willing to do it in ways that are really nourishing. They're part of my, I want to learn more. And so that the desire and willingness in the work, and they're in ways that I can keep just bringing in. It's like folding in, thinking about kneading bread, KNEA, kneading, not NEEDing, NEEDing. Just folding in another thing, like, oh yes, oh wow, that is, whoa, yeah, it's quite big, or oh yeah, but I can fold it in. It's not completely outside my frame of reference, and I find that really helpful. Then I can just keep expanding, be interested in things, exploring, finding out more about things, and do that in a way that I can stay really deeply connected with myself, my soul, my personality is expanding, but in a way that actually I just become more and more connected with myself, rather than kind of thrown off balance, let's say. So, I really enjoyed talking about this today. I would love to hear if you connect with me in any way, whether that's email or on the social medias, and you want to share anything about your experience of this. I would love to hear if you want to share it with me. And I think we live in interesting times, don't we? I think 2026 is a really massive year. I'm experiencing massive shifts in myself and my work. It's a big time. So I'm sending so much love to you in this big time. I wonder what I'll be called to share about next. And I'm sending lots of love.